for Seán Haughey and two members of the Ryan family, if they'd like to join us. Okay, so on Taoiseach, on Sabrina Ushla, current fáilte role of Higlar and the Shunta na Heron, Taoiseach Micheál Martin TD, Ronan McGreevy, this distinguished author, guests, members of the Lemass, Ryan and Haughey families, ladies and gentlemen, you are all extremely welcome to the National Library of Ireland. To our regular readers and visitors, welcome back, Fáilte Airlash. To those joining us for the first time, we are especially pleased to have you here this evening. We are delighted to host the launch of Seán Lemass, The Lost Memoir, and indeed extraordinarily honoured. A book that highlights Seán Lemass's significant place in Ireland's national story and invites us to reflect afresh on his life, leadership and indeed his profound legacy. We are especially pleased to welcome our guest speakers this evening. We will hear first from Taoiseach, then from Seán Haughey to speak on behalf of the Lemass family, and followed by members of the Ryan family. The National Library of Ireland is the most fitting national cultural institution for the launch of such a seminal publication this evening. We collect, protect and provide access, universal access, for over 12 million items that make up the national collections, which this book will now become part of. So it is now my great pleasure as Thuair Ireland Náisiúnta na Héireann to invite Taoiseach to speak.
Someone's microphone, I think. Yeah. And another one gone. That's going to be problematic. Dús baile bhána mar águr privléid agus an óir bhór domsa bheith an seo anocht. Ag an seola lár úntach seo a dhuine Taoiseach na tíre Seán Lemass. Agus ní hamháin go raibh buinte le banú an stáid, ach bhí tionachar darafach suntasach aige orbert na tíre seo. Go sosialte agus go galagrach ina ról mar ara agus na dhéag sin mar Taoiseach. Is láirden sco é seo na hagalibh a rinne Seán Lemass agus obair úntach déinte ag úda Ronan McGreevy. Bhulling go láidir an lár seo a léamh. Could I say at the outset what a wonderful privilege it is to be here this evening to launch this wonderful book, Seán Lemass, The Lost Memoir, and to welcome the Ryan children, if I use that phrase, children of Dermot Ryan and Claire and Michele and Mark, and also Seán Haughey, Aidan O'Connor, and members of the Lemass family. It says here in brackets, the exact number is to be decided. Let's say there's a large contingent of the Lemass family here, and I think it's all those connected. By any measure, Seán Lemass is one of the great figures of independent Ireland. And in this excellent new book, Ronan McGreevy has performed a really important public service. He has made accessible to us all the voice and personality of a leader who delivered remarkable and sustained progress for the Irish people. When the Irish Times first published extracts from Lemass's interviews with Dermot Ryan, it became obvious that he was a more interesting and engaging person than we had understood. More importantly, we got a glimpse of someone who was deeply thoughtful and complex. With this far more extensive presentation of the interviews, we can see even more of the personality, the actions, and the far-sightedness of this truly remarkable life. Ronan has already made an important contribution to our understanding of various turning points in our history. In writing Seán Lemass, The Lost Memoir, he has produced a book which I have no doubt will inspire many more scholars to explore new perspectives on Lemass and his time. The interviews on which the book is based took place over a period of almost 2 years. Dermot Ryan was not a historian or a journalist, but he did have a detailed knowledge of the politics of independent Ireland, as well as the good sense to understand that his primary task was to get Lemass comfortable with talking at length about his half a century of involvement in public matters. The depth of the answers and the complete absence of obfuscations or diversions is remarkable. Lemass believed in getting to the point and being clear about what was done and why it was done. Yet the range of the interviews and the positive atmosphere in which they were conducted also led him to show more of his personality than can be found in any other source. I would also like to mention just a few of the areas where this book gives us a deeper understanding of Lemass. The period before 1923 was excluded as a principal topic, but it is clear that his reaction to those revolutionary years defined him. I think the most important aspect of this was his constant desire to move on, to refuse to be defined by the past while focusing on the future. Repeatedly, he rejected the idea of keeping old divisions alive. In these pages, he often defines past struggles only in terms of positive objectives, while rejecting the need to talk about enemies. As a teenager, he had fought in the Rising and carried a wounded James Connolly's stretcher. Yet a half a century later, he went out of his way to make the point that Irishmen who choose instead to fight in France did so with honour and sincerity. During the Civil War, he was tortured upon arrest, and soon afterwards his brother was cruelly and brutally murdered. Yet, the defining characteristic of his political programme was a belief that we had to stop focusing on Civil War divisions. The twin tragedies of the deaths of his brothers Herbert and Noel, and his own responsibility for Herbert's death, meant that he carried scars and trauma which could never heal. However, he was part of a much wider group who spoke little of those times. He and they shared a refusal to define their patriotism in terms of the actions of the past. You see this in his comments about what he called the Jacobins within the Republican movement, who clung to a rigid orthodoxy in beliefs and methods. You see it in his understanding of the need to develop close and honest relationships with the British government he had fought to remove from Ireland. You also see it in his belief in the need to build trust across sectarian divides. It is a testimony of an exceptional personality that the biggest lesson he appears to have taken from his dramatic revolutionary youth was the need to be able to move on and show respect for those you opposed. No contemporary came close to him in terms of his deep engagement in policy development, and none understood as he did that as circumstances and information change, the policies should also change. His lack of ego in saying that time had come to move on from an old policy is striking. He could well have had as a motto the phrase coined by a student of John Maynard Keynes when he said, "When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do?" In these interviews, his explanations of these overall economic policies from the 1930s onwards are direct and comprehensive. In nearly all cases, they reflect someone who was deeply knowledgeable of both economic theory and contemporary policy. I've always been struck by a comment of the renowned economist and historian Kevin O'Rourke about protectionism. He said that the question about the protectionist policies of the Irish government of the 1930s should not be about why they were adopted, but why they had not been adopted earlier. As circumstances changed, so too did the masses' search for ways of delivering the jobs and higher standard of living, which he believed would be the true mark of Ireland's success. Immediately after the end of the war, and in particular during the crisis of rising prices and food scarcity in Europe, he was impatient to find a new model of development. In opposition, in the 1950s, and this is very instructive, he led policy work of a scale then unknown in an Irish political party. His 1955 speech on economic development is rightly seen as the opening shot in the radical change of policy later implemented under his leadership. In these years, we see the development and clarity of the thinking which went into his transformative actions. Seán Lemass's relationship with Eamon de Valera, his leader of over 40 years, changed over time, but I believe the evidence of this book is that the younger man had a deep respect and admiration for de Valera's irreplaceable role. When talking of the 1920s, he told Ryan, "Nobody but him could have got the Republican movement back to a state of reality." In his account of the dramatic constitutional defence and trade developments of the late 1930s, you find almost all at what he described as de Valera's real political genius of the highest order. He was clearly impatient for faster change, and he would have liked to have become Taoiseach earlier, but his respect for de Valera is undeniable. In terms of what ifs, the biggest one to emerge from these interviews is actually not the often asked question of what would have happened if he had become Taoiseach earlier. It is actually what would have happened if the new departures on North-South relations he and De Valera were considering had been implemented earlier. They wanted to start building engagement and shared development from as early as the 1930s, but events and the inflexibility of others stood in their way. If you want an example of Lemass's capacity for far-sighted reflection, there are few examples better than a paper on Northern policy he developed in the mid-1950s at De Valera's prompting. In it, he set out a model of cooperation and development which is remarkably similar to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. This book confirms again that Lemass's commitment to Ireland, seeking a future as a member of a European community of states, was not an afterthought or a late conversion. It reflected 30 years of deep consideration of European issues and their impact on Ireland. As early as 1928, he wrote a memo to the Fianna Fáil party's Ard Comhairle, which considered a proposal which the French Minister for Foreign Affairs had made concerning the creation of a European customs union. Soon after the end of the Second World War, he publicly advocated for cooperation among European states. At the foundation meeting in Paris in 1947 of what is now the OECD, he told the gathered states, and I quote, "We cannot recover the prosperity we seek or win for our people the high and rising standard of living we wish them to have merely by the temporary patching up of our own national economies." Unquote. The policies which he enacted as Taoiseach achieved his first objective of creating employment. What he wanted was for Ireland to go further and deliver significantly higher standards of living, better public services and high levels of education. This was the reason for Irish independence, and for him, Europe was the only context in which it could be achieved. His internationalism included his belief in the United Nations and Ireland's duty to play a role. In these interviews, he went as far as to describe his push to secure agreement for Irish involvement in peacekeeping as, quote, "one of my major decisions in public life." Lemass's genius in political strategy also comes through in a much clearer way in these interviews. He believed that Fianna Fáil could only succeed if it did two major things. It had to have a programme focused on the future, which could reach across the Civil War divide, and it had to have a wide membership base in all parts of the country. The organisation he built started with no resources and uniform media opposition. He told Dermot Ryan that for some time there was no way to pay for postage or no paper. Current TDs, please take note. He travelled the country, recruiting members, leading policy development and building a movement which reached government within 6 years. It was a feat of political organisation and campaigning which will never be matched. Just as he instinctively understood politics, he equally understood the operation of government. To understand government, you must, he insisted, understand that at least half of the work is to stop bad things happening, or to manage issues which have no news values. He also had an impatience with the angry utopianism of those who were content in the comfort of their rigid ideologies. He accepted criticism but demanded perspective and realism. He told Dermot Ryan, quote again, "I would not be at all upset by the fact that young people are critical of the past generation's achievements, so long as they do not think they have a right to be born into a world where there are no problems left to be solved." Unquote. In the pages of this important book, you will find example after example of a thoughtful leader, impatient with empty gestures and engaged with both theory and practice. It is remarkable how wide the references he uses when answering questions. I was struck by how much he valued having time to read, and to read a diverse range of material. In this context, it is fitting to find that he was shopping for books along the quays when he noticed in a paper that he had just been selected to contest a by-election. truth in the early 20s. He never ceased to be curious about the world, and those who knew him say that he loved debriefing them on their experiences working and travelling abroad. Near the end of the interviews, Dermot Ryan asked him about the judgment of history. He expressed his scepticism that historians would be capable of seeing his times through a proper perspective, and he imagined that they would look back condescendingly at the ignorance of the past generations. In this, he was completely wrong. In fact, the more we engage with the life and impact of Seán Lemass, the more impressive he seems. Born in the 19th century, he remains a source of wisdom relevant in the 21st. Thanks to the generosity of the Ryan and Lemass families and the scholarship and dedication of Ronan McGreevy, we now have a much deeper and nuanced understanding of a remarkable man. This book is an essential read for anyone, particularly for aspiring TDs, young TDs in the Dáil today, and it will teach you how to develop a backbone and a spine to resist all the agitation and protest. And I'm saying this now deliberately. I have my moment. But it's in the book. As he said, if there's not pickets outside the Ardèche, or there's not people protesting, there's something wrong with us in government. I thought it was a fantastic insight. But anyway, it's essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the progress of modern Ireland, and particularly the man who made so much of it possible. Good morning, Michele and Claire.
Because Taoiseach, it takes a Taoiseach who did part of his masters in the reading room upstairs in the National Library of Ireland to know the importance, the seminal importance of probably Ireland, the greatest Taoiseach of the 20th century. So I'm just going to hand over now to Seán Haughey, who will give some short remarks on behalf of the Lemass family, and then we'll go to the Ryan family. Thank you very much, Mr. Haughey.
Now, Taoiseach Dáil deputies agus Gini le Claire. Seán and Kathleen Lemass had 4 children: Maureen Haughey, Peggy O'Brien, Noel Lemass, and Sheila O'Connor. And I'm delighted that representatives of those all 4 families are here this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the family of Dermot Ryan. Certainly our family are very grateful to Dermot Ryan for his friendship, first and foremost, with our grandfather, but especially for carrying out these extensive interviews and for making the material available to a wider audience. He has done enormous service to Irish history and politics in so doing. A big thanks too to Kate Manning from UCD for taking possession of the tapes and transcripts and ensuring their safekeeping for future generations. This book is a significant publication and has been a long time in the making. There have been a number of biographies on Seán Lemass published to date, and I see John Horgan here in the audience. But this book is different. This is a memoir and is in effect his autobiography. We are so grateful also as a family to Ronan McGreevy for undertaking the mammoth task of assessing the material and editing it and ensuring that the tapes and transcripts have seen the light of day through the publication of this book. The book gives a fascinating insight into Lemass's thinking on a wide range of issues. His observations allow us to learn more about the man, and clearly his thoughts have stood the test of time. Seán Lemass placed a high value on loyalty, or loyalty as he used to pronounce it. As we know, he was loyal to Eamon de Valera, of course, as the Taoiseach has said. He and Dermot Ryan were also loyal friends. I might also recount a story about the OPW approaching Lemass to choose an artist to paint his official portrait for Leinster House. Lemass told the OPW that he would like Maurice McGonigal to do it. The OPW suggested that McGonigal might not be suitable, given that at the time he was better known as a landscape painter, to which Lemass replied, "Wasn't I in the War of Independence with him? Isn't that enough?" Of most interest to me and the family are the insights we get from the interviews into the personality of Seán Lemass, the private man, the family man, as it were. Some interesting quotes in this context. Quote number 1. As Taoiseach, I used to hate opening the paper in the morning because I knew something was going to happen. There would be a problem for me. So, current generation of TDs know about that. Or quote number 2. I think the public see ministers being photographed at diplomatic dinners. Most boring functions. This is the part I used to hate. White tie dinners in Dublin Castle. This is not enjoyment. Or another quote. The appointment of my father as a Minister of State, or Parliamentary Secretary as it was known then, has been referred to from time to time. And this is what Lemass said in his interviews about this. I brought him in and told him that the Cabinet was offering him this job and that it was my duty as Taoiseach to ask him to take it, and my duty as his father-in-law to tell him not to be a fool. On family life, I think this interesting quote, and I'll finish on this quote. I did a lot of work at home, but this would not necessarily mean a break in family life. I used to bring home a great deal of reading, so the family were accustomed to me sitting in my armchair, ready, but the children could come and ask me to do their sums for them. There would be no reluctance to interrupt my work. I should say my relationships with my children were quite normal, and on the whole we had a happy family life in the fullest sense of the term. I may not have been as fully informed of everything they were doing as my wife, but I would discuss everything with her. Just a little insight into the private family man that Seán Lemass was. In public, Seán Lemass could sometimes appear a little rough or impatient, but I'm sure my siblings and cousins here this evening will agree with me when I say that to his family, he was a warm and friendly man who was not aloof or austere, who softened in retirement, who was aware of family events and anniversaries, and who was affectionate to his grandchildren. Before I finish, I would like to acknowledge here, excuse me, getting emotional, I didn't know I would. I'd like to acknowledge somebody special here this evening, and that is Lemass's Garda driver for many years, Henry Sheridan, and who is accompanied this evening by his son John. Henry, it's great to see you. Henry undertook that famous journey to Stormont. I think he got the fright of his life when he was told that morning that he was heading up to Stormont. But Henry, you know, the family were always very, very fond of you. So finally, I would like to thank you, Taoiseach. I'm not sure if you're still here. Oh yeah, there he is on the way. Sorry, I was doing so well. I'd like to thank you, Taoiseach, for taking the time to launch this book. I have no doubt that with your interest in history and politics, when you get the time to study this book in great detail, you will find it fascinating, and that it will be of great assistance to you in your important work governing this country in these very challenging times.
Thank you so much, Seán. That was just so eloquent. And it was a privilege to hear it. So I'd just like to invite Claire, Michele and Mark Ryan, representing the Ryan family now, to give some remarks, and thank you very much.
Okay, so hold on. Right. Good evening. Actually, it really is an honour to be here. But it's a bit intimidating, all these wonderful speeches and in your company. So we're just the daughters, so we just have a couple of words from our dad, Dermot. So we are aware that Seán Lemass is a significant and important figure in Irish politics. And he had a very close relationship with my dad, Dermot, who saw him as a father figure. So my family are really grateful to Dad for his foresight in capturing and reflecting on Seán Lemass's experiences. When I was very young, Dad and I used to go on walks together around the lake, and he often spoke of his conversations between himself and Seán Lemass, but it was a bit over my head because I was very young. But it is with thanks to the work of my niece, Natasha, and Christine, my eldest sister, that Ronan, to whom we are really grateful, involved us in this opportunity to illuminate this chapter of Ireland's history. Moreover, we acknowledge that the past is present today on Taoiseach Micheál Martin's presence. Turning now to my middle sister, Michele, who will share an insight into the collaboration between my father and Seán Lemass.
Thank you, Claire. Natasha found a letter that Seán Lemass wrote to Dermot about 6 months before Seán Lemass died. It shows how committed Seán Lemass was to the project and the strength of their collaboration. I think he would have been very pleased to see the project become a book. I'd like to read the letter to you. It's dated the 9th of November 1970. Dear Dermot, I return herewith the opening chapters of the book which you sent to me some time ago, and you will note that I have made a number of verbal alterations in the text. It seems to be turning out much better than I had expected so far. Needless to remark, I will be very willing to cooperate with you in any further work you may decide to go into. Yours sincerely, and he signed it. So I'd just like to say, on behalf of the Ryan family, we are really delighted to be here to celebrate this book launch today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire and Michele, for those really beautiful words, and for everything that your father did, obviously, to record such an incredibly important series of interviews over a 2-year period. So I'm now very pleased and very honoured to welcome Ronan McGreevy, the author, or the reason why we're here this evening. Ronan is a journalist, obviously with the Irish Times, a very noted and distinguished journalist and historian, and recently appointed media fellow at Trinity's Longring Hub Arts and Humanities Research Institute. So gorgeous, fantastic. His work has brought fresh insight to some of the most important moments in Irish history, and his books on Ireland's remembrance of the First World War and the 1916 Rising have earned wide recognition, including the honour of being made to evaluate the law of the literature by the French government. As a regular reader and researcher here in the National Library of Ireland, Ronan is no stranger. Tonight we celebrate his latest achievement, Seán Lemass, the Lost Memoir, in the editing of this extraordinary collection of Lemass's recorded reflections. Ronan has given us the closest thing we have to the memoir Lemass never wrote himself, making these interviews accessible, vivid and human. It is a great honour and pleasure to introduce Ronan McGreevy.
Taoiseach Charles Haughey, Seán Haughey agus a Denúis le smór an domsa fean seo an you, sa Laura náisiúnta an Laura seo. Taoiseachs, ministers, TD senators, staff of the National Library of Ireland, members of the Lemass and Ryan family, it's a great honour to be here today in this beautiful place to launch this book. I'd like to thank a few people, and apologies in advance if I leave anybody out. First teacher, the late Dermot Ryan, without his vision and tenacity, none of us would be here today. And it's wonderful to see Michele and Claire on behalf of the family. I felt a small modicum of satisfaction in 2018 while he was still alive, when the Irish Times published a supplement on the Lemass tapes, and was the first indication that your father's work was not in vain. To that end, I'd like to thank Mark Hennessy, then the Irish Times news editor, now our Ireland and Britain editor, for making that supplement happen. Unfortunately, he can't be here tonight. Thank you to the National Library of Ireland. I have had so many dealings with you over the year, both professionally and personally, as a user of this wonderful building. I'd like to thank you, Aubrey, and also particularly Liz Coffey, for making this event happen. And to the Lemass family, I'd like to say to his great-grandson, Aidan O'Connor, thank you for entrusting me with this material in the first place, and to you, Seán, and to Rory O'Connor for your help and encouragement in getting this done. And thank you to UCD, the custodian of these tapes, and the transcripts for digitising these tapes. What is in this book is only a third of what is in the transcripts, and I hope some enterprising historian finishes what I started by bringing this important historical treasure trove to full fruition. Thank you to the publisher, Deirdre Nolan, who believed in this project from the beginning, to my copy editor, Lisa Gilmore, and to my agent, Faith O'Grady, for all her hard work on my behalf. David McCulloch, Cormac Moore, and my good friend Tommy Conlon provide sage advice in relation to the text. And I'd like to take this opportunity to remember the late Martin Mansfield, whose untimely death we all mourn. Martin had agreed to review the text, but sadly died before he could do so. Thank you to Professor Gary Murphy too, for providing the foreword. I'd like to thank John Horgan, who's here with his son Jack Horgan-Jones, for his wonderful biography of Seán Lemass, which was my Bible when I was writing this book. And finally, I'd like to thank my family, my wife Rebecca, my children Rosamond and Leo, my sister Nolly, my aunts Margaret, and my cousins Niall and Oisin and Hugh, and have I left anyone out? I'm sorry. We're all here tonight. My grandfather, John Francis McGreevy, was a veteran of the War of Independence and a founder member of the NJ McManus Common in Carrick-on-Shannon. He was so enamoured by Eamon de Valera that he named my father after him. And coincidentally, Taoiseach, you visited my father in Eamon in 2020 during the general election campaign. And my father passed away in 2024, and I'd like to remember him tonight. Taoiseach, I'm deeply honoured by your presence here and by so many members of the Fianna Fáil party. In this your party centenary year, you're rightly proud of Seán Lemass and his contribution to Irish life. I'm sure you'll agree, though, that Seán Lemass's legacy does not just belong to the Fianna Fáil party, but to all the people of this country. And see, indeed, some of the warmest tributes to Lemass were paid to him by members of the opposition when he died. Seán Lemass's life is an exemplar of that paradox that those who fought for Ireland's freedom were at heart men and women of peace. We were extraordinarily fortunate that the revolutionary generation, all of them, were at heart Democrats who believed in democracy, the rule of law, a free press, policing by consent, and sound institutions that had the trust of the public. We spent much time over the last century reflecting on their mistakes, and Lemass is candid about them in this memoir, but we should also reflect on what they got right. His life was a lesson in not allowing the injustices of the past to affect the decisions in the present, always to be focused on the future and the future generations. His visit to the North Taoiseach was much in the spirit of your own Shared Ireland initiative. He believed that one could only bring about the unity of Ireland by building from the ground up, starting with the things we have in common in this small island. As he said, I began to talk about unity as a spiritual, not a political conception, something which would only follow upon the removal of these misunderstandings, these bigotries, these historical animosities. I think that advice remains salient today. Before I go, two things in the book that I'd like to share with you at this launch tonight. And as the Taoiseach said to him, said before, when he was asked how he felt future historians would view him, he said, in 50 or 100 years' time, they'll be judging the events of this period on completely wrong standards. But as you said yourself, Taoiseach, I would suggest that many of the observations he makes in this book about Ireland's place in the world, the importance of European defence and making decisions for the greater good rather than sectional interests, remain as relevant today as he did when he first said them in the 1960s. And finally, when he asked how he'd like to be remembered, he told Ryan, "The only possible way it might affect me, the future judgment, would be if it was likely to damage my children or my grandchildren. If they can say my old grandfather was not too bad a guy when he was in it and felt that was some advantage, so much the better." Well, when you see the presence of so many members of the Lemass family, all 4 branches of his family here tonight, I think he would have no worries in that regard. They are rightly proud of Seán Lemass, as we should all be too. Go Micheál Martin.
Extraordinary words. My sincere thanks to Taoiseach Micheál Martin, TG, Seán Haughey, Claire and Michele Ryan, and to Ronan in particular for this evening and for your thoughtful and enlightening contributions. It's a pleasure to host this event here at the National Library, and we are currently in the midst of the most significant capital development project in our almost 150-year history. We are 150 years old next year. With planning permission now in place, we are preparing to bring our beautiful West Wing, just to the right-hand side here, back to life as a major new, fully accessible public space for major exhibitions, ideas, conversation and shared cultural experience. So evenings like this remind us of why this work is so incredibly important. They show what a National Library can be at its best, not only as a home for collections, including Ronan's extraordinary contribution, but a living place of encounter, reflection and public memory, because this is the recorded national memory of the country. Thank you all for being here. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you so much indeed for your presence here this evening.
Yeah.